Today on NewsWatch, Planned Parenthood under fire, the move to defund the nation's largest abortion provider. Hear what changes lawmakers are calling for. Plus,
she said, "I will do whatever it takes to save my baby."
She got a second chance to choose life, how this woman was able to reverse her abortion. And an Ebola nightmare that turned into a miracle, how faith brought Dr. Kent Brantly back from the brink of death. And thanks so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Protests across the country today as the movement to defund Planned Parenthood grows. The nation's largest abortion provider does continue to defend itself. But as Caitlin Burke reports, this time, people don't seem to be buying it.
From protests in the streets to the halls of Congress, cries to defund Planned Parenthood are growing.
There's no reason for Planned Parenthood to get any federal money, and basically, the things they are doing are unacceptable to a vast majority of people, pro-life or pro-choice.
This comes after an anti-abortion group released 2 videos showing top Planned Parenthood officials haggling over the cost of the body parts of aborted babies.
What's not told is that, of course, these are highly selectively edited. The folks behind this, in fact, are part of the most militant wing of the anti-abortion movement that has been behind, the bombing of clinics, the murder of doctors in their homes and in their churches, and that's what actually needs to be looked at.
Presidential hopeful Carly Fiorina says that's no defense, and she says it's far from the actual issue.
By the way, this has nothing to do with whether you're pro-choice or pro-life. This has to do with the moral foundation of our nation. If a woman was sitting outside of Planned Parenthood in, for example, her OBGYN's office looking at this ultrasound at precisely the same point in her pregnancy, her doctor would be saying to her, "Look at your baby. Look at its heartbeat. Look at its fingers and toes."
Under increased scrutiny, it appears Planned Parenthood may also be misrepresenting sponsorship. According to a Fox News report, some of the biggest companies they have listed as corporate sponsors deny any association to the abortion provider. Among those companies, Coca-Cola, Ford, and Xerox. As the controversy continues to grow, protests are planned in more than 50 cities today as the controversy continues to grow. Pro-lifers marching under the banner Women Betrayed, urging people to demand their states investigate, prosecute, and defund Planned Parenthood. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
The Obama administration is sending 3 cabinet secretaries to Capitol Hill to sell the Iran nuclear deal. They face a skeptical Congress. Democrats and Republicans alike are concerned about making a deal with the radical Islamic regime in Tehran. But right now, much of the heat over the Iran deal is centered on GOP presidential candidate Mike Huckabee. Top Democrat Hillary Clinton now responding, and President Obama taking time during his trip to Africa to blast Huckabee for saying the deal marches Israel to the door of the oven.
The particular comments of Mr. Huckabee would be considered ridiculous if it weren't so sad.
This steps over the line, and it should be repudiated by every person of good faith and concern.
3 times I've been to Auschwitz. When I talked about the oven door, I have stood at that oven door. I know exactly what it looks like.
The Iranian regime has repeatedly threatened to wipe Israel off the map, and Huckabee says the president is naive not to take those threats seriously. A leading House Republican is calling on President Obama to fire IRS head John Koskinen. Jason Chaffetz, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, accuses Koskinen of obstructing a congressional investigation into the agency, specifically failing to protect and produce 24,000 emails to and from Lois Lerner, the focus of the investigation. Lerner headed an IRS division that oversees tax-exempt groups. Her department unfairly denied and delayed applications for tax-exempt status from Tea Party and other conservative groups. An IRS investigation concluded the emails were lost when Lerner's hard drive crashed and IRS workers erased the backups. The American Center for Law and Justice represents 38 groups in a lawsuit against the IRS. ACLJ Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow is scheduled to testify about the scandal before a Senate subcommittee on Wednesday. The Boy Scouts now allow gay scout leaders. President Bob Gates announced the change Monday.
For far too long, this issue has divided and distracted us. Now it's time to unite behind our shared belief in the extraordinary power of scouting to be a force for good.
The Boy Scouts of America had allowed homosexuals to be Boy Scouts, but not to hold leadership positions. Gates said policy was not sustainable and would lead to lawsuits. Church-sponsored chapters that object to gay leaders on religious grounds are exempt from the policy. Still, denominations that host most chapters are threatening to leave the organization. A Ten Commandments monument at the Oklahoma State Capitol must go. Its Supreme Court reaffirmed a previous ruling Monday and denied a rehearing requested by the state's attorney general. The court had found previously that the monument is a religious symbol and ordered it removed because it violates the state's constitutional ban on using public property to benefit a religion. In this latest decision, the Chief Justice said arguments on behalf of the Oklahoma Capitol Preservation Commission did not merit a rehearing in the case. Still to come here on NewsWatch, a mother who had an abortion and then immediately regretted it. Hear how she reversed the abortion and later gave birth to a healthy baby boy. We don't often get second chances at life, but thanks to a discovery by a doctor in North Carolina, more than 80 women who had taken an abortion pill have gotten just that. The discovery gave them a second chance after they realized they wanted to keep their unborn babies after all. Heather Sells brings us the story.
Little Gabriel is alive and well thanks to his mother's instincts and a medical breakthrough that can shut down an abortion. Andrea Minikini was studying nursing when she got the news she was pregnant. Reluctantly, she and her boyfriend decided to abort their baby.
Andrea was unsettled when she came to this clinic to get an abortion, but immediately after she swallowed the pill, she regretted what she had done.
I ran out and actually started trying to throw up, but nothing would come out, nothing.
On a mission to save her baby, Andrea called several obstetricians and even went to her local emergency room. Doctors repeatedly told her there was no way out and that she would need to take the second abortion pill within 24 hours. After 2 sleepless nights, Andrea's mom discovered the abortion reversal hotline and a local doctor who said she might be able to help. The doctor found the baby's heartbeat and a break in Andrea's placenta.
The baby had almost, instead of going towards it, he had gone away from it and he had curled up in a little ball.
The doctor immediately began the reversal process. It involves flooding a woman's body with progesterone, the pregnancy hormone. It blocks the deadly effects of mifepristone, found in the abortion pill RU486.
These are hormones that essentially the woman's body has in it anyway, and we're just supplementing that.
Dr. Matt Harrison created the protocol 9 years ago when a patient came to him soon after taking the first dosage of RU486.
And she said, I will do whatever it takes to save my baby. And that was just such a powerful message coming from her. Someone who had just taken a medication to end their baby's life, realized immediately that she had done something that she didn't want to do. And I was like, you know what? I have no idea what to do. This is not something that they teach you in medical school. They don't give you an antidote to abortions.
Harrison's discovery takes advantage of a 2-day gap between the taking of the first and second abortion pills. The reversal must begin within 3 days of taking the first pill and before taking the second. So far, it has helped 87 mothers deliver healthy babies and another 74 who are expecting. But not everyone succeeds. About 40% have failed in their hope of reversing their abortion. Dr. Lewis Lipscomb has tried 4 times and says it can be tense.
It's a bit nerve-wracking because we're all on pins and needles just hoping that the next 2 or 3 weeks are going to go smoothly for her.
The question of birth defects is a tough one. So far, all the moms who have successfully gone through the process have delivered healthy children. In the meantime, they expect Planned Parenthood and other abortion supporters to push back against the life-saving technique.
They have a very powerful machine out there that will make fun of this, that will attack it, say that it's junk science, say that it's junk medicine, say that it's not FDA approved. They'll do whatever they can to try to combat it.
Father Frank Pavone, the National Director of Priests for Life, is working with Dr. Harrison to raise awareness by distributing reversal kits to healthcare workers and pro-life advocates.
The technique gives us hope. The reversal technique gives us hope that, first of all, we can say to her, it's not too late. We can save your baby.
To help them to turn the ship around and to love them, regardless of what they did yesterday, and really to help them to learn to love their baby is very exciting.
Today, little Gabriel and his mom are thriving thanks to family support and a life-saving procedure that could potentially help millions of other women reverse a life-altering decision. Heather Sells, CBN News.
And still to come, meet the first person with the Ebola virus ever treated in the United States. Dr. Kent Brantly talks about his heroic battle to save others and how he survived the deadly disease. Last year, the worst Ebola outbreak in history killed thousands of people in West Africa. One American missionary was in the middle of it, trying desperately to save lives when the deadly virus nearly took his life. Take a look.
For 6 weeks last summer, Dr. Kent Brantly worked nonstop, treating dozens of Ebola patients at a hospital in Liberia. Ebola is highly contagious and deadly, claiming up to 90% of its victims. Despite taking extreme precautions, Brantly started feeling sick, and 3 days later heard the devastating news that he too had contracted the deadly virus. Christians around the world began praying for Brantly's recovery. His mission organization arranged to have him evacuated to Emory Hospital in Atlanta, making Kent Brantly the first person infected with Ebola to be brought to the United States for treatment. Miraculously, he survived and was released from isolation 3 weeks later. He and his wife Amber have written about their experience in a new book, Called for Life: How Loving Our Neighbor Led Us into the Heart of the Ebola Epidemic.
And for more on their remarkable testimony, George Thomas recently spoke with Kent and Amber Brantly here in our CBN News studios. Check it out.
Dr. Kent Brantly and his wife Amber join us now. Thank you so much for coming on the broadcast. This situation, what's happening today in Liberia, Sierra Leone, are we out of the woods yet, or are we still seeing cases of Ebola in these countries?
There are still 20 to 30 cases being diagnosed in Sierra Leone and Guinea every week. Last week there were 26 cases between those two countries. Liberia was declared Ebola-free in May, but at the end of June had a resurgence of cases and is now on their countdown once again to Ebola-free status.
And clearly, Amber, you see this, the world has kind of moved on a year later, but you have friends. You went back as a family in June. You got a chance to go back and thank some of those folks who took care of your husband. But I'm sure folks there are still fearful, right? Are they still afraid?
I think they've learned a lot in a year's time, and sure, it's still something to be afraid of, but they've taken great strides. We saw a big shift in our visit back in June because there were wash stations beside every public place and store and church and school, and I think the awareness has become such a higher level that that's really changed the culture there.
It's interesting. When your husband came back, there was one commentator who basically said you guys were idiotic. I mean, this was foolish. Why put yourselves in harm's way? Why go out? There's so many problems in other parts of the world. Why go to Liberia? Why put yourself in such harm's way? And your response was what?
God called us to serve people in need. To do that, you go to where the need is. And we saw a great need for basic medical care in Liberia. We went there to serve people with the compassion that Jesus has had on us. And that was really our motivation for moving there. And when the disaster of Ebola came to our area, it only heightened our sense of purpose for being there to serve people, to have compassion in the midst of this increasing need.
July 26th, this week, was when you were here in the States, you had evacuated your family. Your husband is there, in essence, on the front lines. When he called you to say, this is what the doctor has told me, that I have Ebola. I mean, you knew leaving when you left your husband behind. Did you think the possibility was high that your husband could contract this deadly virus?
I really didn't. I really thought that I trusted in his procedures and the steps that they were taking at the Ebola treatment unit, that he felt safe, and so I felt safe.
Yeah.
but we knew we weren't immune to that. Just because we're Christians didn't make us any less vulnerable than everyone else. And so it wasn't a complete shock because I knew he'd been getting sicker in the days before his diagnosis, and but it was a horrible feeling.
How did you deal with that horrible feeling? I mean, July 31st, you got the sense, you read it in the book, that you felt like you were at the end of your life. I mean, you were taking your last breaths. You really felt that?
I really did, yeah. I was having a lot of trouble breathing. It got worse after they started the infusion of the ZMapp, the experimental drug. For the first half hour or so, my symptoms got worse. I had this violent rigors, this shaking, and my breathing was getting worse. And that's when I looked at the nurse and said, I don't know how you're going to breathe for me when I quit breathing. I can't keep this up.
How did you respond to that? I mean, was faith an integral part of your response and just getting through the day every day?
Yeah, absolutely it was. And the upbringing I had and in the scriptures and in hymns, and that's really what saw me through, were the words of David and the Psalms, or the old hymns that we sang growing up, is really what sustained me during those difficult times, and that's how I could pray.
How would you, I'm curious to ask you this, you look at how people responded to your case, and then obviously the incredible anxiety that people had here in the United States. You've had a year to look back. How would you categorize America's response to the Ebola crisis, to your plight, and to the general situation of what was taking place there?
There was a lot of fear when I was brought back to America, the other cases that were diagnosed in this country. And that fear, I think, is a natural response to something that is unknown, something we're not familiar with. I think we should look back on it now and realize that our healthcare system is, while things did not work perfectly, it was adequate for preventing a large outbreak of this disease. And we should look back also at cases like Dr. Craig Spencer in New York. There was a lot of negative things said about his activity prior to his illness. But if we look at the protocols that he used, the measures that he took, no one else got sick. Those things worked. And we need to...
And you relied on those protocols. I mean, you were on the front lines. You knew what you had to do to keep yourself safe.
And in the treatment units, I think that worked. I think I got my infection outside of the treatment unit in interaction away from all of the protective equipment and some of the stricter protocols.
Amber, you're here back in the States. How are you responding to the public fear with what your husband was going through, and then obviously these other cases your husband had mentioned, folks coming back from the hot zone, going on, the subway, going to Pizza Hut, and then the public outcry telling folks, listen, if you're coming back from this part of the world, you have got to go into 21 days of quarantine, and some of the anger people felt.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I had to react to that publicly. It was just, we tried to encourage people to rely on the science, and science says that if you've not been exposed to a person who has symptoms, who is sick in any way, then you are zero risk. And that's all we could preach, is you have zero risk unless you've known someone who is sick with Ebola virus disease.
Going forward, this is a calling for you guys. You are called for life. This is not your typical missions, outreach, as you discovered early on, but this is something that you guys are passionate about doing, about going into these very difficult places, provide the physical healing, but also bring the spiritual aspect.
I don't think you can separate the two. I think we get into trouble when we start trying to compartmentalize our lives and say, this is my professional life, this is my spiritual life, this is my home life. I think we are called to live as followers of Jesus, and that ought to impact every aspect of our lives, our profession, the way we treat our family, and everything else we do in our lives.
Amber, you guys have together survived Ebola. I mean, there can't be anything more scary than Ebola. So where are you guys headed to next? I mean, definitely not Mississippi, because there's not a whole lot going on in Mississippi,
Probably not.
right?
No, we like a little more action, I think.
Okay.
We don't know. We're still waiting on the Lord to show us where our next move will take us, but we do feel like this calling that moved us to Liberia in the first place is still what the Lord has for us, and so we're looking at where that might lead us next.
Will you consider going back to Liberia?
We would. Liberia will always hold a special place in our hearts, not just because of the events with Ebola that occurred there, but because of the relationships we developed, the people we know, the people we love who love us, and that'll be a place that always is in our hearts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, terrific. Okay, the book is called Call for Life, How Loving Our Neighbor Led Us into the Heart of the Ebola Epidemic. It is available wherever books are sold. Thank you so much for all you do for the Kingdom of God. Great to have you guys on the broadcast. Yep, thank you so much.
Operation Blessing is providing shelter and building homes for orphans in Nepal. 64 children lost their home when a deadly earthquake destroyed their orphanage last April. Operation Blessing is providing temporary shelter while teams rebuild the orphanage. You can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to its website, ob.org. And finally this hour, a message we hope you'll post, tag, tweet, and share with your friends. And of course, we hope that it will motivate you. This Tuesday tweetable, we want it to inspire you as well. Remember, God is the potter and we are the clay, and he is always molding us and shaping us into his vision of what we're supposed to be. And sometimes that can hurt. And that's because sometimes our character doesn't measure up to our calling. So God is burning us and refining us to handle the higher calling he's placed on us. That's hard to take, I know, but it is oh so worth it. That is going to do it now for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a terrific Tuesday. We'll see you tomorrow.